Hello and happy World Card Making Day, everyone. This is Laureen from the Paper and Ink Boutique, and I'm going to walk you through how I created this card, which is one of 4 of my cards that I designed for World Card Making Day. I'm using products that were included in the World Card Making Day kit that you could have purchased from our store, and a few other additional items, but very few other items were required for this very simple and easy to put together card. Okay, I'll go through the materials and then we will get started. So for the card base, I just used a regular A2 sized piece of white cardstock. So that measures 8.5 by 5.5, and it's scored at 4.25. And then I just folded it over. And then I also took another piece of white cardstock in order to make these 3 circles, and I'll go through that in a moment. I have a piece of black cardstock and it measures 3 by 5.5. I am using the Simply Stated Designs gorgeous Floral Academia collection, and the paper, which is in the background here, is from the paper 10. That's the 12 by 12 sheet of paper that has 4 different patterns within the 12 by 12, and they measure 6 by 6 in each section. And so I'm using this as the one patterned paper. I've got 3 of the ephemera that come in the Floral Academia Essentials ephemera package, or sorry, these ephemeras are from the Terrarium ephemera package, and then the Sentiment Happiness Begins with Gratitude comes from the Floral Academia Essentials ephemera package, and that includes tabs and tags and circles and sentiments and flags and all sorts of good stuff in there. And then there's a few more details in the background of the card. One, you'll see that there's the black cardstock has been embossed. I have used a Spellbinders The Tiny Dots embossing folder for that one. This is just a regular embossing folder. And then you'll see on the pattern paper, there's actually a foiled image on there. And for that, I used the Spellbinders Better Press Plus press plate, and it's the script text. Sorry, I don't have a lot of range in here. It's a script text press plate, and you can use Better Press plates for hot foiling. So it says hot foils beautifully, and it does indeed. And then inks, I've used Catherine Pooler Cashmere ink. I felt it went really well with the ephemera. And then lastly, a little bit of clear embossing powder that I've used on the sentiment. And I've just used Ranger Clear Superfine Detail embossing powder. And then whether you use an embossing ink pad or marker, either or will work. And I'll go through that in a moment. Okay, so I will get started here. I've done a lot of prep work in advance because it's pretty basic die cutting and that kind of thing. But what I wanted to start with is how I did the ink blending, and I've done this on a few of my other card videos already. So if you've already watched a few of my videos and you're like, I got this, I don't need to watch this, feel free to skip forward. But I will go through it because it is an efficient way of putting down ink and helps to prevent ink from getting in places you do not want it. So if we go back to my original card, you can see that the back side is white, but the front panel, front part of the card, is this cashmere ink color. And so how I did that, rather than using masking paper or Post-it notes or low tack adhesive, I've actually used the Waffle Flower grip mat, as well as masking corner stencils. So this is the package that the grip mat comes in, so I'm using the 5.5 by 8.5 inch mat, and then these masking corner stencils. And what that looks like is just this very simple stencil here, and it's great. You can see how it could be used to mask off areas that you're ink blending. So I've done this now for a few of the backgrounds, and I'm really pleased with how it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my card, and this is going to be my front panel. So this is the side that I want to make sure there is no ink. So I'm going to just set my card base on my grip mat, and it's nice and sticky, so it's not going to go anywhere, which is really great when you're ink blending. And then I'm going to take my stencil and line it up with the spine of the card. And I'm going to bias it so that it's right on top of the spine, so that I make sure that I get full coverage, but that I'm not getting the back. And actually, yeah, that should be okay. You can see when the stencil is stuck to the grip mat, you can actually see that adhesion. You can see that it's stuck there. I don't have as much on the top, but that will be okay, I think. Actually, you know what? Sorry, I am going to move it. It's not as much as I would have liked. I'm just lining it up with the spine of the card. I appreciate that's probably hard to see on camera, but just where the crease of the fold is, I'm just going to line it up with that. And again, you can see when it's pressed down. So I've got both ends. And now I'm going to go ahead and lay down my ink. Now, in the original card, you can see that this black panel is going to cover most of the card. So I'm actually not going to even bother ink blending the whole panel. I'm just going to ink blend where I know it's going to show. And that saves a bit of ink and effort. I'm using the Waffle Flower blender brushes, background blender brushes. They're just a nice way to lay down a lot of ink, and comes in this package of 4. They're relatively new to the store. They're really beautiful and they're nice to use, so I have been using that a bit. And if you've never used Catherine Pooler inks, they're lovely. They're really nice and juicy. I do find when you're using the blender brushes that you do want to make sure that your ink pad is nice and juicy. So I've had my re-inker at the ready, and I'm just going to focus my blending on the top and bottom of my card. And the orientation of my card is landscape, so I only need to worry about the left and right edges, which are going to be the top and bottom. And as I've mentioned in my other videos, when I was using this ink, it may look like a bit of a hot mess when you're first laying it down, but Catherine Pooler inks dry back really, really nicely, which means that they just dry with a very even coverage, even though when you're first putting them on, they may look a bit splotchy, but I promise you that they will dry back really, really nice. And the benefit with these blender brushes is that you can start by layering on a fine, like a small amount of ink, a light layer of ink, and then you can build up that color by just continuing to go over. So I'm just going to start down at the bottom here. I've been using my ink pad quite a bit for my other cards, so it does need to have it re-inked. You can see it's not laying down as much color as it normally would, but that's just because it needs to be re-inked. We'll keep going at it here and get there. The other thing you can do with the Catherine Pooler ink pads is actually just take them, invert it, and swipe down, and it works really well. Again, mine, it probably isn't re-inked well enough to do that and to get full enough coverage, but that's a really super fast way of laying down ink, especially with these ink pads. You can always take your sample of your black cardstock strip and make sure that you've got enough ink blending. Might just do a little bit more on this side. And then I'm just going to let that dry a bit, and I'll talk about a few of the other pieces that I've already created. Because really it's just going to be about assembly now, given the prep work that I've done in advance. So, but I wanted to go through how I did do some of the pieces. Okay, like I said, that may not look like the most beautiful blending, but it really won't matter, and it will dry back really nicely. So then I just pull up the stencil, and as I've done in my other videos, you can just see what a nice clean line that is. So very easy way to add color to a background. Okay. Now I just wanted to mention a few things about the embossed panel. So I just took the 3 by 5.5 inch black strip of cardstock, and when you're using an embossing folder, for those that may be not familiar, it's a really good idea to do a light spritz of water. And so I just use the Tim Holtz Distress Sprayer. Got it at my desk all the time. And I just give it a really light spritz from a little ways away, front and back, and that just helps to loosen up the paper fibers when you're running through the embossing folder, so there's no chance of cracking. This one is a regular embossing folder, meaning it's not 3D, so it doesn't have multiple layers of dimension. And so I also used my universal plate system to do my embossing folder. And if you have the system and you're not really familiar with how it works, if you want to build a standard embossing folder, it actually has it written right on the platform. This is the platform that will go through your die cutting machine. So I always read from the bottom up. So you use your platform base A, and they're all labeled. Then you take your platform top, which is B, and that's this layer here. It's a thinner plastic shim. And you put that on top, and then it says to take your standard embossing folder with the paper inside. So this is where you would take your embossing folder, and you would put your cardstock inside that's been lightly misted with water. You close your embossing folder, lay it on top of those two pieces, and then the last piece, according to that sandwich that we just read about, that it says to use your cutting plate C. And then you would run this whole sandwich, this whole contraption now is called a sandwich. You'd run that through your die cut machine, and you would end up with your embossed piece of cardstock. Okay, now I meant to mention at the beginning, these cards that we've all designed are intended to be inspiration only. We've used products that we have in our stash. You may not have this exact embossing folder, and that's okay. Perhaps you have a different embossing folder, or maybe you don't have an embossing folder at all. But what you could do is you could score lines on the background just to create a little bit more visual interest. Or maybe you could use a fine stencil or a background stamp that has some size appropriate imagery. All we're trying to do is just add a little bit more interest into this piece of cardstock. So that's what I wanted to mention about the embossed piece. And then with the circles on the original card, these ones here, what I did was I took a piece of cardstock and I took my Catherine Pooler ink again, and I just covered the piece of cardstock in that ink. And again, you can do direct to paper, so just taking your ink pad, swiping it along, or using a brush or a foam applicator, however you want to apply the ink is just fine. And then once that was covered, then I used the Prism Studios nesting dies, the stitch circles, to cut out the larger of the two sizes. So I've used two size circles. I used a larger to cut out 3 circles, and that is the background of each of these circles here. So colored my cardstock, cut it out with the larger of the 2 stitch circle dies. Okay. Now on top of the stitched circles, the cashmere color, is the designer's paper, the pattern paper, and what I did was I hot foiled the Better Press plate. I'm not going to go through the process of hot foiling, but again, this was the Better Press plate. It's the script text, and I absolutely love it. And the great thing about the Better Press plates is you can hot foil, you can better press with it with ink so that you get the impression and the texture, or you can do it with just getting the texture. And of course, if you're using it as a better press, if you use a nice cotton paper, a nice heavyweight paper, you're going to get more of an impression. But these are really, really versatile plates. So I highly, highly recommend the Better Press system. It is so easy, and of course my passion is hot foiling, so I absolutely love that. The color of foil that I used for the background is pewter. Now I did use glimmer hot foil. That's the one thing to know, is that when you are hot foiling, you have to use foil specifically intended for a hot foil system. It's not the same that you would use with a laminator. And then the other thing I want to mention is I do find when I'm using better press plates for hot foiling, I will sometimes add an extra shim between my plates. Now, if you're hot foiling, you know what these plates are. This is what you put on top of your hot foil plate with your cardstock and your foil, and you run that through with the platform from the glimmer machine through your die cut machine. I do end up putting 2 thin pieces of cardstock as my shims, because I do find that the better press plates are slightly thinner than a regular hot foil plate. So it needs just a little bit more pressure, and that's what that extra shim will do. Okay, so that's my little tip for using a better press plate for foiling. Otherwise, it foils exactly the same as any other plates, and they foil really, really beautifully. So this was the extra piece that I had, or the full piece that I had foiled, and then I actually just cut out, using the smaller of the nesting dies, some circles. And if you've never seen hot foiling before, I did save the peel and reveal because it is so much fun. So these are the circles. You've got the cardstock, which has been colored, or sorry, is the designer cardstock from Simply Stated, sorry, and I've hot foiled right on top of that. So all you do is you peel up a corner of the foil and you take it off, and you end up with this gorgeous, gorgeous foiling. Okay, so I'll do it again here. Another one, very easy. You just find the corner and voila. Oh, makes me excited every time. Still hasn't lost its magic. Love it. I think it's just so pretty. Just adds that little hint of shimmer. Very subtle, but I thought it was the appropriate size and scale for this card. Just adds a little bit of interest. And the really neat thing too is you could use this for another project, but if you also are a hot foiler, you know you can actually use this on one of the solid hot foil plates and have little foiled circles now with a negative image. So that's kind of fun as well. All right, back to the card. So now that we've got all of our circles, we've got our background circles, we can actually just start assembling these. So very simple. I've just got my Sweet Petunia glue press here. I'm gonna add in my glue. Center that on there as best I can. Give it a good press. Okay, and then this one I have popped up with some foam adhesive on the back. That will be the middle circle. I've just popped it up just to, again, a little bit of interest to differentiate it from the other 2 circles. I love dimension. Probably noticed that if you've watched any of my other videos for World Cardmaking Day. I'm all about the dimension. And okay, so I'm just going to add the last circle here. Okay, well those 2, well that one is drying. We can actually start to assemble the rest of the card. Okay, now the other thing that I did off camera was I had taken the remaining strips. So when I went to do hot foiling, I trimmed this down so that I knew I had enough room to cut out 3 circles. I did end up cutting out a 4th. And then this was the strip that was left over. From this strip, which measures 6 inches and however wide, I did cut 2 1/4-inch strips of this paper. And that's going to be the little strips that you see here. Again, it's just a little detail, but again, I found it tied it all together because we've got the coordinating background in the circles here, and then the background behind the black image. Okay, so we will start with that. We're just going to assemble that onto the back of our polka dot piece. So what I do when I'm adding strips like this, and it looks really nice if you do this in a metallic, like a gold paper or a silver or a black glitter or something like that, looks really nice, is I'll just add a little bead of glue there and then take my cardstock and just line up so that I have, let me see, that's easier to see, maybe what, 1/8 of an inch that's showing, and then I'll repeat that with the other side. Okay, so just take a bead of glue, and then I'll flip it over. Sorry, I'll make sure I do this on white just so it's a little bit easier to see. So just put my paper down. A little bit trickier to do because my paper is not flat, but then I just try and get an equal amount here. Okay. Okay. So now basically you have 2 borders, and then I'm just going to trim off the ends here. Do it on both ends. Okay. And then we can attach this panel to our card base that we created earlier with the inked edges. Okay, so I will glue that down. I'm just applying glue to my background here. Then I'm going to center it so I have generally equal amount showing top and bottom. And this worked out well in that the black panel was the same width as the card, even though it's 5.5 inches. Each of them were. Sometimes, you know, you just end up being a little bit off, and then if that's the case, you can just take a paper trimmer and trim off any excess so that you have nice clean edges. Okay, so there's that. And now we can go ahead and start assembling or gluing on the circles. I'm going to save my popped up one for last because it's going to go in the middle on the top. And then the thing to watch when you're putting these on, even though these words aren't really legible, there is, like, the lettering themselves is somewhat legible, so you want to make sure that you've got your orientation correct when you're gluing these down. And for this, I'm going to bring in my little pear blossom ruler and just going to have a little bit of an edge there, try and get it equidistant from the top and the bottom of the black border. Add my glue. Okay. And I'm going to put the other one on the right hand side. Okay, as well, just check the orientation of the letters, that they make sense. Making sure it's somewhat spaced evenly with the right hand side. Oopsies. Sorry, shifted that a little bit too much. Sorry, this is taking a little bit longer. Okay, there we go. And then the last one, after we glue our ephemera down. So I had that one there, this one here. No real science to this. Now, in my previous cards, I did add some glossy accents or Nouveau crystal drops or clear embossing powder to the glass area of what the terrarium, would look like in real life. I didn't do that with these ones, but you certainly could. I just didn't feel it was necessary. This is just a simple, very simple little card. Could pull this one together very quickly. And okay. Okay, and then the last one. Put on this popped up piece. Actually, I'm going to take the adhesive off here first, pop this down, and then I'm going to put the ephemera on there just so I can line it up with the other two. And let's get this last backer off. Okay. Just going to center this. There we go. And then bring back my little piece of ephemera. Try and line that up as the best I can with the other two. Okay. And then the last thing I did was with the sentiment strip, two things. I did add a couple pieces of black cardstock strips to the back, just to have a little bit more dimension. It'll be a little bit hard to see, but there is a little bit of dimension on this one. Another thing I did was I heat embossed some clear embossing powder, so I'll quickly do that as well. And again, when you're applying the embossing powder, you can do it one of two ways. You can either use an embossing pen, like the Versamarker pen, or directly from the ink pad, just smoosh it on there. I'm just going to use my Versamarker. You can see I'm not being overly careful here. I just want to get ink down. My Versamarker is getting a little bit dry, but I think there's enough here to get the job done. Okay. And I'm just going to take my tweezers, just pick up the tiniest of the corner. Just put some embossing powder. I'm going to heat set it off to the side here. actually going to do it one more time, and what that does is gives you a really nice smooth surface, and it makes it look like an epoxy sticker. So it's a really neat effect and very little effort to do this. And the great thing about the Simply Stated ephemera and sentiment pieces is that they're made from 100 or 80 pound cardstock. So they take this type of mixed media very well. They emboss very nicely with really no warping. Okay, so there we go. So now we have shiny sentiment, helps draw your eye to that sentiment, and I thought that was a really nice sentiment. Happiness begins with gratitude. So wouldn't that make a lovely thank you card for somebody? I thought that was lovely. It's a different way of saying thank you. You never have enough gratitude cards on hand, I find. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to do with this sentiment strip is take my black pieces of cardstock and just add them to give this a little bit more structure and dimension. Okay, and last one, I'm just using 2. You could use more if you like, but I think 2 is enough. Just gives it a little bit of a raised look. Okay, and then add it to the card. I thought it went well just in this bottom corner, rather than, you could put it in the middle there if you'd like, but I'd done that for my other card, so I wanted to try and do something different. And I'm going to bring my ruler back in. Let's see. There. So again, these cards are intended to be inspiration, but hopefully you can look and say how this could translate using different pattern papers. Maybe you have some lovely floral ones or Christmas ones or different themed papers with other ephemera pieces or stamped images that you have. You could use other background embossing folders or whatnot. So lots of different options, but just gives you a template to work from. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've been inspired, and I hope you enjoy watching all the rest of the World Card Making Day videos. Take care.